Before we begin, have you ever made a split-second decision that changed everything forever? This true story of a Seattle engineer will show you that even the most devastating mistakes can become the foundation for incredible redemption. Warning: what you're about to watch will transform how you think about forgiveness, responsibility, and the power of Christ to heal the impossible. Subscribe now and hit the bell for more life-changing testimonies. She was only 6 years old. I caused the accident, but her mother did something incredible. Picture this. You're watching a man who seemed to have it all figured out. Michael Thompson, 32 years old, living his version of the American dream in the beautiful city of Seattle, Washington. As a senior software engineer at Microsoft, he was earning 6 figures, living in a gorgeous house in the suburbs of Redmond, with a loving wife named Jennifer and their precious 7-year-old daughter, Emma. Every morning, you would see Michael following the same routine that thousands of successful professionals follow. Wake up at 6 a.m., coffee with Jennifer while they planned their day, help Emma get ready for school, and drive his silver Honda Accord through the tree-lined streets to drop her off at Willows Elementary before heading to his office. Michael wasn't just successful professionally, he was what you'd call a good guy. He coached Emma's soccer team on weekends, volunteered at their local church's youth program, and never missed a school recital or parent-teacher conference. His colleagues respected him, his neighbors liked him, and his family adored him. "I had everything I thought mattered," Michael would later say. "I was climbing the corporate ladder, providing well for my family, and honestly, I felt pretty proud of the life I'd built. I thought I was in control of my destiny." But here's what Michael didn't realize, and what most of us don't realize until it's too late. Our entire lives can change in the span of 3 seconds. 3 seconds that seem completely insignificant when they're happening, but can divide your entire existence into before and after. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Michael was running slightly behind schedule. Emma had been slow getting ready, and traffic on Highway 520 was heavier than usual. As he drove through the Bellevue neighborhood toward Emma's school, his phone buzzed with what seemed like an urgent work notification. "It was just a quick glance," he would tell investigators later. "I thought it might be an emergency from my boss about a critical system failure. It felt responsible to check it, but responsibility and intention don't matter when physics takes over." Michael had no idea that in exactly 47 seconds, his perfect life would collide with a tragedy so devastating that it would take a miracle beyond human comprehension to ever find peace again. What you're about to witness is how one family's unthinkable loss became another family's path to redemption, and how God can use our worst moments to create His greatest miracles. Now I need you to imagine the most ordinary Tuesday afternoon you can think of. School was letting out at Washington Elementary in Bellevue, and like every other day, parents were arriving to pick up their children. The October air was crisp, leaves were turning golden, and everything seemed perfectly normal in this quiet suburban neighborhood. Sarah Martinez, a 34-year-old nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital, had just finished her morning shift and was walking hand in hand with her 6-year-old daughter Sarah toward their car. Sarah was chattering excitedly about the art project she'd completed that day, a drawing of their family with their new puppy, Max, that they'd adopted just 2 weeks earlier. "Mummy, can we stop at the park on the way home?" Sarah asked, skipping alongside her mother in her bright purple backpack and light-up sneakers. "I want to practice on the monkey bars so I can be strong like you." Maria smiled, adjusting her nurse scrubs. "Maybe for a few minutes, Mija, but we need to get home to let Max out and start dinner before Papa gets home from work." Meanwhile, Michael was driving through this same neighborhood, his mind racing with work deadlines and family obligations. He'd just received a text from his project manager about a critical server issue that needed immediate attention. The message preview on his phone screen showed just enough to make him worry that their entire system might be crashing. "You have to understand, In Michael's world, a system failure could affect thousands of users and potentially cost the company millions of dollars. In his mind, taking 3 seconds to read the full message wasn't irresponsible. It felt necessary. Those 3 seconds happened at exactly 3:47 p.m. Pacific time. Michael's eyes left the road just as he approached the crosswalk at Pine Street and 156th Avenue. His Honda Accord was traveling 35 miles per hour in a 25 mph school zone. Not recklessly fast, but 10 mph over the posted limit because he was running late. In those same 3 seconds, Maria and Sarah Martinez had reached the crosswalk. The walking signal showed white, indicating they had the right of way. Sarah was still talking animatedly about her art project when they stepped into the street. Michael looked up from his phone just in time to see a flash of purple, Sarah's backpack, directly in front of his car. He slammed on the brakes and jerked the steering wheel to the right, but at 35 mph on wet asphalt, physics doesn't allow for miracles. The impact threw Sarah Martinez 15 feet. She landed on the rain-soaked pavement and never got up. Maria's screams could be heard 3 blocks away. Michael sat in his car, shaking uncontrollably, staring at the scene that would replay in his nightmares for years to come. In 3 seconds, 2 families' lives were shattered forever. But what happened next would prove that even in humanity's darkest moments, God's light can shine brightest. What you're about to hear next is the part of the story that's almost impossible to put into words, but I need you to understand the full weight of what happened that October afternoon, because it's only when you grasp the complete devastation that you'll truly comprehend the miracle that comes later. The first responders arrived within 4 minutes of the 911 call. Paramedics from Bellevue Fire Department rushed to Sarah Martinez's small body, lying motionless on the wet asphalt. Maria was on her knees beside her daughter, speaking rapid Spanish prayers through tears, while her hands, the same hands that had saved countless children as a pediatric nurse, desperately checked for signs of life. "Por favor, Dios, no me la quites," Maria whispered. "Please, God, don't take her from me." Sarah was rushed to Seattle Children's Hospital, ironically the same hospital where Maria worked. Can you imagine the cruel twist of fate? A mother watching her own colleagues fight to save her daughter's life in the same emergency room where she had comforted hundreds of other parents through their worst nightmares. Meanwhile, Michael Thompson sat in the back of a police car, not because he was under arrest, but because he was in complete shock. Detective Sarah Williams from the Bellevue Police Department had seen thousands of traffic accidents, but she would later say that Michael's reaction was unlike anything she'd witnessed. He kept asking if she was okay, Detective Williams recalled. Over and over, "Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." When we had to inform him that Sarah had died, he completely collapsed. I've never seen anyone take responsibility so immediately and completely for their actions. You see, Michael didn't try to make excuses. He didn't blame the rain or the timing or even the phone notification. When officers asked what happened, he looked them straight in the eye and said, "I killed a little girl because I looked at my phone. There's no excuse. I did this." That evening, as news crews gathered outside Seattle Children's Hospital, Michael's own family was falling apart. Jennifer Thompson paced their living room, trying to process how her husband, the man she'd trusted to drive their daughter safely every day, could have caused such a tragedy. "How do I explain to Emma that Daddy hurt another little girl?" Jennifer sobbed to her sister on the phone. "How do I ever let him drive our daughter again? How do I even look at him the same way?" 7-year-old Emma didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, why Mommy was crying, or why there were news vans outside their house. All she knew was that something terrible had happened, and her safe, predictable world had suddenly become scary and uncertain. But the Thompson family's pain, as real as it was, couldn't compare to what was happening in the Martinez household. Carlos Martinez, Sarah's father, had rushed home from his construction job to find his house filled with relatives, neighbors, and the devastating reality that his little princess would never run into his arms again. That night, 2 families went to bed, forever changed. One family grieving the loss of their precious daughter, the other grappling with the horrific reality that someone they loved had caused unspeakable pain to innocent people. Neither family could have imagined that this tragedy was just the beginning of a story that would ultimately demonstrate God's power to heal the impossible. I want you to try to imagine waking up the morning after the worst day of your life, hoping for just one moment that it was all a nightmare, only to have reality crash over you like a tidal wave. That's what Michael Thompson experienced every single morning for weeks after the accident. The legal process moved swiftly. Michael was charged with vehicular manslaughter and reckless driving. His attorney, David Kim, one of Seattle's top criminal defense lawyers, urged him to plead not guilty and fight the charges. The prosecution has to prove intent and gross negligence, Kim explained. We can argue this was a momentary lapse in judgment, not criminal behavior. But Michael shocked everyone, including his own lawyer, with his response. I'm pleading guilty to everything. I don't want Sarah's family to endure a trial. I don't want them to have to relive this tragedy because I'm trying to escape consequences for my actions. The media attention was relentless. Seattle news stations ran the story every night for weeks. The headline that appeared in the Seattle Times would haunt Michael forever. Microsoft engineers text message kills 6-year-old girl. Local radio shows debated distracted driving laws. Michael's LinkedIn profile was flooded with angry messages from strangers. But you know what was worse than the public shame? The private guilt was literally killing Michael from the inside. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't look at his own daughter without seeing Sarah Martinez's face. Every time Emma asked to go to the park or wanted him to read her a bedtime story, Michael was reminded that another father would never have those moments again. I wanted to die, Michael would later admit. Every single day, I wished I could trade places with Sarah. The thought of suicide wasn't just tempting. It felt like the only honorable thing to do. How could I justify living when my selfishness had ended an innocent child's life? Jennifer tried to support her husband, but the strain was destroying their marriage. I loved Michael, but I didn't know how to live with what he'd done, she explained. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who had killed someone's baby. I started sleeping in the guest room. I couldn't bear to be close to him. The worst part for Michael came 3 weeks after the accident when he drove past Washington Elementary during school dismissal time. He watched dozens of children walking safely to their parents' cars, and the sight of their bright backpacks and innocent laughter sent him into a panic attack so severe that he had to pull over and call 911. I realized that I would never be able to see children the same way again, Michael said. Every child I saw reminded me of the child I had killed. I felt like I was cursed to live with this image burned into my memory forever. Meanwhile, the Martinez family was planning a funeral for their 6-year-old daughter. Maria had taken indefinite leave from the hospital because she couldn't bear to be around sick children. Carlos was struggling to return to work because well-meaning co-workers kept offering condolences that only reopened the wound. Both families were drowning in grief, anger, and devastation. Neither could imagine that healing was possible. But sometimes God's greatest miracles begin in our darkest moments, when human strength fails completely and only divine intervention can bring hope. I need you to picture the most tense courtroom scene you can imagine, because what happened on November 18th in King County Superior Court would leave everyone present questioning everything they thought they knew about justice, mercy, and the power of forgiveness. Michael Thompson walked into courtroom 7A wearing a simple black suit, flanked by his attorney David Kim. He had lost 35 pounds since the accident, his face gaunt and hollow from weeks of sleepless nights. Jennifer sat in the second row with Emma, who was staying home from school to see what happens to Daddy. The little girl didn't understand why her father looked so sad and scared. On the opposite side of the courtroom sat the Martinez family. Maria wore all black, clutching a framed photo of Sarah in her purple backpack, the same backpack she'd been wearing the day she died. Carlos held his wife's other hand, his jaw clenched with the kind of anger that comes from indescribable loss. Sarah's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins filled 3 entire rows behind them. Judge Patricia Morrison had presided over hundreds of vehicular manslaughter cases, but she would later say this one was different from the moment it began. The tension in the room was so thick you could practically touch it. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Morrison began, "you have pleaded guilty to vehicular manslaughter in the first degree and reckless driving. Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to give both families an opportunity to address the court. Mrs. Martinez, would you like to make a victim impact statement?" What you're about to hear is where this story takes a turn that no one in that courtroom, not the lawyers, not the judge, not the court reporters, could have predicted. Maria Martinez stood slowly, still holding Sarah's photograph. She walked to the podium, and for a moment the only sound in the courtroom was the soft clicking of her heels on the marble floor. Every eye was fixed on this grieving mother who was about to confront the man who had killed her daughter. "Your Honor," Maria began, her voice barely above a whisper, "6 weeks ago, Mr. Thompson took away the most precious thing in my world. My Sarah was my sunshine, my reason for getting up every morning, my greatest joy." Michael couldn't look up. He stared at his hands, tears falling onto the defendant's table. "She was going to be a doctor like me," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "She wanted to help sick children get better. She had just lost her first tooth and was excited about the tooth fairy. She loved our new puppy and was learning to ride her bike without training wheels." You could hear people in the gallery beginning to cry. Carlos Martinez nodded grimly, waiting for his wife to demand the maximum sentence, to call for justice, to make Michael pay for destroying their lives. But then Maria Martinez did something that would change everything. "Mr. Thompson, please look at me," she said. Michael slowly raised his eyes to meet hers across the courtroom. What happened next defied every expectation, every natural human response, every assumption about how a grieving mother should react to her child's killer. And in that moment, everyone present was about to witness something that could only be described as a miracle. What I'm about to tell you happened in front of 47 witnesses, was recorded by court stenographers, and was broadcast live on local news. But even with all that documentation, people who weren't there still find it hard to believe. Maria Martinez looked directly into Michael Thompson's eyes, the eyes of the man who had killed her 6-year-old daughter, and spoke words that would echo through that courtroom for years to come. "Mr. Thompson, I forgive you." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Morrison's pen stopped moving. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keyboard. Even the bailiff turned to stare at Maria as if he hadn't heard correctly. But Maria wasn't finished. "I forgive you not because you deserve it, and not because it will bring Sarah back. I forgive you because Jesus Christ forgave those who crucified him, and he has commanded me to forgive as I have been forgiven." Michael Thompson collapsed. Not figuratively, literally collapsed. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees right there at the defendant's table, sobbing with an anguish that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. "I don't want you to go to prison carrying hatred in your heart," Maria continued, her own tears now flowing freely. "I don't want you to spend years drowning in guilt and shame. My Sarah is with Jesus now, and she would want me to show you the same mercy that God shows all of us." Carlos Martinez stared at his wife in shock. This wasn't what they had discussed. This wasn't the speech they had planned. But as he watched his wife stand there, radiating a strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond human capability, he realized he was witnessing something supernatural. "Your Honor," Maria said, turning to Judge Morrison, "I am formally requesting that Mr. Thompson receive the minimum sentence allowed by law. But more than that, I am requesting permission to visit him in prison, to pray with him, and to help him find the healing that only God can provide." The courtroom erupted. Spectators gasped. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Sarah's relatives whispered urgently among themselves in Spanish, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others weeping openly. Michael's attorney David Kim would later say it was the most extraordinary moment of his 25-year legal career. I've seen plea bargains, I've seen emotional testimonies, I've seen dramatic verdicts, but I've never seen anything like what Maria Martinez did that day. She literally transformed a courtroom with the power of forgiveness. But here's what's even more incredible. As Maria spoke those words of forgiveness, something began happening to Michael that medical science can't explain. The panic attacks that had plagued him for weeks suddenly stopped. The crushing weight of guilt that had made it impossible for him to breathe seemed to lift from his chest. For the first time since the accident, he felt like he could take a full breath. It was like someone had opened a window in a room where I'd been suffocating, Michael would later describe. Maria's forgiveness didn't just free me from her hatred, it freed me from my own self-destruction. Judge Morrison wiped tears from her eyes as she prepared to pronounce sentence, knowing she had just witnessed something that would change her understanding of justice forever. This was the moment when a tragedy that had destroyed two families became the foundation for a miracle that would eventually impact thousands of lives. Let me take you inside the King County Correctional Facility, where Michael Thompson was serving his 18-month sentence. But what you're about to discover is that sometimes God's greatest works happen in the most unlikely places, even in a prison cell where a broken man finally stops running from his pain and starts running toward his purpose. Michael's cell was 8 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls, a narrow bed, a small sink, and a window that faced the prison yard. Cell Block C, Unit 14. For the first month, this tiny space felt like a tomb where he was buried alive with his guilt and grief. But during his second month, something began to change that would transform not just Michael, but everyone around him. It started during the longest nights, when the weight of what he'd done would press down on him like a physical force. Unable to sleep, Michael would lie on his narrow bunk and find himself talking to God, not formal prayers, but desperate conversations with the only one who could possibly understand his pain. Jesus, he whispered into the darkness one February night. Maria said, you forgave the people who killed you. But how? How do you forgive someone who destroys an innocent life? How do you love someone like me? What happened next, Michael would later describe as the most real encounter he'd ever had with another person, except this person was Jesus Christ himself. I felt a presence in that cell that was more real than the concrete walls around me, Michael recalls. It wasn't a vision or a dream. It was Jesus sitting on the edge of my bed, and for the first time since the accident, I wasn't alone with my guilt. The conversation that followed would continue not just for that night, but for weeks. Jesus began showing Michael scenes from his own life, how he had wept over Jerusalem, how he had felt the weight of every sin ever committed, how he had chosen to die for people who would mock him, betray him, and nail him to a cross. Michael, Jesus spoke to his heart, do you think your pain is greater than mine was? Do you think your guilt is heavier than the weight of the world's sin that I carried? I know exactly what it feels like to be responsible for suffering, because I took all suffering upon myself. Night after night, Michael found himself in these divine conversations. Jesus showed him how Sarah Martinez was not just safe, but joyful beyond imagination, running through heavenly fields with no fear of cars or danger. He showed him how Maria's forgiveness hadn't been human strength, but divine love flowing through a surrendered heart. But Lord, Michael asked during one of these encounters, how can any good come from what I've done? How can you use someone who killed a child? The same way I used a murderer named Moses to deliver my people, Jesus replied. The same way I used a murderer named Paul to spread my gospel. Your greatest failure will become your greatest qualification to help others, but first, you must let me heal the wounds in your own heart. For 3 months, these encounters continued. Michael began to experience a love so deep, so complete, so unconditional, that it began to heal parts of his soul he didn't even know were broken. Not just the guilt from the accident, but childhood wounds, years of performance-based self-worth, and the crushing pressure of trying to be perfect. Other inmates began to notice the change. Marcus Williams, serving time for armed robbery, approached Michael in the cafeteria one day. "Man, what happened to you? You came in here looking like a walking corpse, and now you got peace in your eyes. What's your secret?" That question opened the door for Michael to begin sharing what Christ was doing in his life. And soon, he was leading Bible studies in cell block C that were changing the entire atmosphere of the prison. I want you to understand something remarkable that was happening during Michael's 4th month in prison. What started as personal healing in his cell was becoming a movement that would eventually reach far beyond those concrete walls. The Bible studies Michael was leading had grown from 3 inmates to over 40, men who had spent years hardened by violence, addiction, and despair were experiencing the same supernatural love that had healed Michael's guilt. The prison chaplain, Father Rodriguez, said he'd never seen anything like it in his 15 years of ministry. But the most powerful part of Michael's transformation wasn't happening in the group meetings. It was happening during his private moments with Jesus, when Christ continued to reveal his heart for the broken and the guilty. "Michael," Jesus spoke to him during one profound encounter, "I want you to understand something that will change how you see your future. Sarah's death was not part of my plan. It was the result of living in a broken world where people make choices that cause pain. But watch how I can take even the most tragic waste and create something beautiful." Jesus began showing Michael visions of his future, speaking to thousands of people about the dangers of distracted driving, counseling families who had experienced similar tragedies, and creating programs that would save countless lives. He saw himself working with legislators to pass stronger laws against texting while driving, and establishing support groups for people struggling with guilt and forgiveness. "Your pain will give you authority to speak hope into situations where others have no credibility," Jesus explained. "People will listen to you because you've been where they are. You've experienced both the devastating consequences of a moment's poor choice and the incredible power of forgiveness." But perhaps the most healing part of these encounters was when Jesus showed Michael how much he was loved, not despite his mistakes, but completely and unconditionally. "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," Jesus told him repeatedly, "not because of what you do, but because of who you are to me." The change in Michael was so dramatic that even the prison guards noticed. Officer Patricia Chen, who had worked in corrections for 12 years, requested a meeting with the warden. "Sir, whatever is happening with inmate Thompson needs to be studied. The violence in cell block C has dropped 60% since he started his Bible studies. Inmates are voluntarily turning in contraband and asking for conflict mediation instead of fighting." Word of Michael's transformation reached Sarah Martinez through the prison chaplain, who had become friends with the priest at her Catholic church. When Maria heard about the Bible studies and the changed atmosphere in the prison, she knew this was what she had prayed for when she forgave Michael in court. "I want to visit him," Maria told Father Rodriguez. "Not because I have to, but because I believe God is doing something miraculous through this tragedy, and I want to be part of it." The meeting between Maria and Michael in the prison visiting room would become another pivotal moment in this incredible story. As Maria walked through those secure doors, carrying a small gift for the man who had killed her daughter, neither of them could imagine how this visit would launch a ministry that would eventually impact legislation nationwide. When Michael saw Maria approaching across the visiting room, he felt the presence of Jesus more powerfully than ever before. It was as if Christ himself was walking through those doors, bringing healing not just to Michael, but to a pain that had rippled out far beyond that October afternoon. "Maria," Michael said, tears already flowing, "how can you be here? How can you look at me with anything but hatred?" Maria's response would echo the heart of Christ in a way that continued to demonstrate the supernatural power of forgiveness to heal the impossible. Picture the most unlikely friendship you can imagine, and you still won't be prepared for what you're about to witness. In the sterile visiting room of King County Correctional Facility, two people whose lives had been forever connected by tragedy were about to discover that God's plans for redemption are far greater than anything human minds can conceive. Maria Martinez sat across from Michael Thompson at a small metal table, separated only by the invisible weight of their shared history. She had brought something with her, a small wooden cross that Sarah had made in Sunday school just 2 weeks before the accident. It was painted purple, Sarah's favorite color, with the words, "Jesus loves you," written in a child's careful handwriting. "Michael," Maria began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm here because 8 months ago, Jesus showed me something in that courtroom that changed everything. When I looked at you, I didn't see Sarah's killer anymore. I saw a broken man who needed the same grace that God has shown me." Michael could barely speak through his tears. "Maria, I don't understand how you can even be in the same room with me. Every day I wake up and remember that your daughter is gone because of my selfishness. How do you forgive something like that?" "Because forgiveness isn't a feeling, Michael. It's a choice," Maria replied, sliding the small purple cross across the table. "Sarah made this for me, but I believe God wants you to have it. She always said that Jesus loves everybody, even when they make mistakes." When Michael touched that little wooden cross, something supernatural happened that both of them would describe as feeling the presence of Jesus physically in that room. "It was like Sarah was there with us," Maria later said. "I felt her approval, her joy that something beautiful was coming from her death." "Maria," Michael said, his voice breaking, "God has been showing me visions of how he wants to use this tragedy. I see us working together, speaking to people about the dangers of distracted driving, helping families heal from similar accidents. Is that crazy?" "No, Michael," Maria smiled for the first time since Sarah's death. "That's not crazy, that's God." What happened next would shock the prison staff and eventually make national headlines. Maria began visiting Michael every week, bringing Carlos with her after the 3rd visit. They prayed together, planned together, and began developing what would become the Sarah's Heart Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to preventing distracted driving and helping families heal from traffic tragedies. Prison warden Jennifer Walsh had never seen anything like it. "In 30 years of corrections, I've never witnessed an inmate and a victim's family develop a partnership like this." The transformation in Mr. Thompson was already remarkable, but watching these 3 people turn their tragedy into a mission was absolutely extraordinary. By Michael's final month in prison, their weekly meetings had evolved into strategy sessions. Maria, Carlos, and Michael were designing school programs, developing legislation proposals, and planning speaking engagements that would begin the moment Michael was released. "We're going to tell Sarah's story to every teenager in America if we have to," Carlos said during one of their planning sessions. "If her death can save even one other family from going through what we've experienced, then it will have meaning." The most powerful moment came during Michael's last week in prison, when Maria brought a surprise visitor, Emma, Michael's own daughter, who was now 8 years old. Jennifer had been hesitant about the meeting, but Maria had convinced her that healing needed to include Michael's family too. "Mr. Michael," Emma said shyly, clutching her mother's hand, "Mrs. Maria told me that you and her are going to help keep kids safe. Can I help too?" Michael knelt down to Emma's level, overwhelmed by the grace of this moment. "Yes, sweetheart. You can help by always remembering that every choice we make affects other people, and that God can use even our worst mistakes for good." When visiting hours ended that day, Michael watched Maria, Carlos, and his own family walk out together, no longer defined by tragedy, but united by a shared mission that would honor Sarah's memory while preventing other families from experiencing similar loss. 3 days later, as Michael walked out of prison, he wasn't just a free man. He was a man with a purpose that had been forged in the fire of tragedy and refined by the supernatural power of forgiveness. Fast forward 5 years, And let me show you what happens when God takes a moment of devastating tragedy and transforms it into a movement that changes an entire nation. What you're about to hear proves that no pain is ever wasted in God's hands, and no tragedy is too great for His redemptive power. The Sarah's Heart Foundation has become one of the most influential traffic safety organizations in America. Michael Thompson and Maria Martinez travel together across the country, speaking to over 200,000 teenagers annually about the deadly consequences of distracted driving. Their message is simple but powerful. One text can destroy two families forever. Their speaking program, called 3 Seconds, has been implemented in over 2,000 high schools across 35 states. The statistics are remarkable. In communities where they've spoken, distracted driving incidents among teenagers have decreased by an average of 47%. Insurance companies estimate that their programs have prevented over 800 accidents and saved more than 150 lives. But the numbers only tell part of the story. What's truly miraculous is watching these two people stand on stage together, a grieving mother and the man who killed her daughter, demonstrating a love and partnership that can only be explained by divine intervention. People expect to see hatred between us, Maria explains to audiences. Instead, they see two people who have been healed by the same grace that's available to everyone. That gets their attention in a way that statistics never could. Michael's transformation extends far beyond public speaking. He earned his master's degree in counseling while building the foundation, and now provides therapy specifically for people struggling with guilt, trauma, and the need for forgiveness. His waiting list is 6 months long, filled with people who heard their story and recognized their own need for healing. The foundation has also influenced legislation. The Sarah Martinez Act, which imposes stricter penalties for distracted driving and mandates traffic safety education in schools, has been passed in 12 states and is pending in 8 others. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is what happened within their families. Carlos and Maria's marriage, which nearly ended in divorce during their grief, has been completely restored. They've had another daughter, Sophia, who is now 3 years old and loves hearing stories about her big sister Sarah, who lives with Jesus. Michael and Jennifer's family has also been transformed. Emma, now 13, often joins their speaking engagements and has started her own youth organization called Emma's Promise, where teenagers pledge to drive safely and hold each other accountable. Sarah's death taught me that life is precious and fragile, Emma tells her peers. But Sarah's Heart Foundation taught me that God can use anything, even terrible things, to help people and save lives. The most powerful moments come when families who have been impacted by their programs reach out to share their stories. Just last month, a mother from Texas called to say that her son had been about to text while driving when he remembered Michael and Maria's presentation. He pulled over instead, and seconds later, a drunk driver crashed into a tree exactly where his car would have been. That phone call reminded us why we do this, Michael said. Somewhere in Texas, a family is intact tonight because Sarah's story reached her son at exactly the right moment. As I finish telling you this incredible story, Michael Thompson is 37 years old and has been married to Jennifer for 15 years. They live in a house just 3 miles from where the accident happened, and every morning, when Michael drives Emma to school, he passes the memorial garden that the community built for Sarah Martinez. Instead of triggering guilt and shame, that garden now reminds him of how God can take our deepest failures and transform them into our greatest purposes. Sarah's purple flowers bloom every spring, and engraved on the memorial stone are the words she wrote on that wooden cross: Jesus loves you. Today, those words represent not just a little girl's simple faith, but the foundation of a movement that continues to save lives, heal families, and demonstrate that there is no tragedy too great for God's redemptive love to overcome. Today, as I finish sharing this incredible true story with you, Michael Thompson and Maria Martinez continue their mission together. The Sarah's Heart Foundation has now impacted over 1 million teenagers across America, and their 3 seconds program has been translated into 7 languages and implemented internationally. But here's what I need you to understand. This story isn't just about Michael and Maria. It's about you, watching this right now, holding your phone, making choices every single day that could change everything in an instant. Maybe you've been driving while texting, thinking, I'm a good driver, I can handle it. Michael Thompson was an excellent driver too, until 3 seconds changed 2 families forever. Maybe you're carrying guilt from a mistake you made, believing you're too far gone for forgiveness. Michael thought the same thing until he discovered that God's grace is greater than our greatest failures. Or perhaps you're facing a situation where someone has hurt you so deeply that forgiveness seems impossible. Sarah Martinez shows us that forgiveness isn't about feelings. It's about choosing to let God's love flow through us, even when everything inside us wants to hold on to anger. The wooden cross that Sarah made, with her simple message, Jesus loves you, now sits in the Sarah's Heart Foundation office in Seattle. But the love those words represent, that's available to you right now, wherever you are, whatever you've done, whatever's been done to you. Every time you get behind the wheel, you have the power to honor Sarah's memory by putting your phone away. Every time you're tempted to let guilt consume you, you can remember that God specializes in turning our worst moments into our greatest purposes. Every time someone hurts you, you can choose the radical path of forgiveness that Maria chose. Your story isn't over. Your mistakes don't define you. Your pain doesn't have to be meaningless. Just like Sarah's 3-second tragedy became a movement that has saved hundreds of lives, God can use whatever you're going through right now for something beautiful. Before you go, do this. If this story impacted you, subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because stories like this one could literally save your life or the life of someone you love. Smash that like button if you believe that no mistake is too big for God's forgiveness and that every tragedy can become a testimony. Tell me in the comments. After hearing Michael and Maria's story, what's one thing you're going to do differently when you drive? And is there someone you need to forgive or ask forgiveness from? Put your phone down the next time you drive. Sarah Martinez can't be saved, but the person in the crosswalk ahead of you can be. And if you need prayer for forgiveness, either to forgive someone or to receive it yourself, type Jesus help me forgive in the comments and I will personally pray for you. Remember, your next 3 seconds could change everything. Make them count. See you in the next life-changing testimony.